So this weekend marked a very special performance. It was in fact the final performance of Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne performing live at the Aston Villa football ground in Birmingham. A truly historic day, I would say. Historic for music and historic for heavy metal. And yeah, once in a lifetime event. Something really special. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person, although I very much wanted to, but the tickets were quite expensive, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't get one anyway, because lots of people wanted them. But I was able to get a ticket for a live stream, which was about £30, and enabled me to watch the show from the comfort of my own home, which was great. I could watch it on the TV and relax, drink a few beers, watch all the bands, and I did that from about 5 p.m. on the evening. I'd been out in the afternoon. Actually, I'd been in Birmingham for something else, and got home and started watching it about 5 p.m. all the way through till probably, I think it was about 1:30 a.m. when it finished. And it really was a great night. It was a great gig. It was great seeing all the bands, and it was great seeing Ozzy perform and Black Sabbath, and it really was it really was something to remember, I think. So this video is going to be a little bit different, because I am going to be talking about metal and what metal means to me, and how it's kind of influenced and impacted me over the years, and maybe even how without metal I would not be sat in front of a modular synthesizer. So it's a kind of a loose tie into modular, so stick with it. That's what we're going to talk about today. Hey there, if you are enjoying these videos and you are enjoying the weird and wonderful world of modular synthesis, then please do consider hitting the subscribe button. It just lets the algorithm know that I'm not sat here muttering to myself in this room full of cables for no reason. And of course, if you would like to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon, the link is in the description. There's not an awful lot on there at the moment, but it is growing and it is filling up. You can kind of think of it as like an exclusive minimalist modular experience. But genuinely, your support is very much appreciated. It keeps the patch cables untangled and the ideas flowing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. It really does mean a lot. But let's get back to the video, shall we? Cheerio. So yeah, this weekend was such a great weekend, and it was I think it was really something special, just watching some of the bands play on the TV, and just being able to experience that. And so I wanted to kind of talk about metal and and what it kind of means to me growing up as a teenager, and how it sort of influenced me. So I probably spoke about this before at some point in the past, but maybe not in any great length. But as you know, I started out as a guitar player. So at the age of 14, I started learning the guitar. But really, this journey probably starts a little bit further back than that. At the age of 11 or 12, perhaps, when I discovered metal and heavy rock music and grunge and everything that was happening in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and that was going on. I discovered that for the first time sort of around that age of 11 or 12, having started high school. So prior to that, my musical tastes were probably informed by my parents. So my parents possibly not the most adventurous in terms of musical taste. So my dad is a massive fan of Status Quo, a great band, by the way. I have seen them play lots of times when I've been to watch them with my dad. Yeah, so he's a big Status Quo fan, also a big Queen fan, and so you know a lot of that kind of rock music is what made up my youth, my childhood, my early childhood. But once I started high school and started making friends with new people, and many of them had got different musical tastes, it wasn't long before I came across Metallica. And Metallica really was my sort of introduction to heavy music, something completely different that was nothing like anything that my parents had. And it wasn't just Metallica, it was Guns N' Roses, it was Nirvana, Megadeth, Sepultura, Slayer, Anthrax, all of those bands that were around at the time, sort of late 80s, early 90s, which was kind of, you know, it was sort of the peak of thrash and grunge really taking off. And for many of those bands, it was that time where they sort of solidified themselves. You know, we had that year, 1991, when we had all those great albums come out, the Black Album, Nevermind, and so on. So it was around that time that I discovered all this music for myself, and you know, became obsessed with it really. So much so that I wanted to learn to play the guitar, and that's what I did. I got a guitar, and I can remember. You know, the first guitar that I had, I just borrowed off somebody. I think one of my parents' friends had got an old acoustic guitar, which they lent me just to see if I could get on. And I taught myself a couple of chords, probably C and G, and maybe a D chord, and that was it really. And then I had this magazine. There was a magazine that I managed to convince my mom to buy me, and it had got. On the cover of the magazine, it had got James Hetfield of Metallica, and he was. It was a shot. The camera was looking up, and he was stood playing the guitar. Mic stand in front of him, top off, ESP Explorer, and face to the side. Huge gob of spit coming out of his mouth. Which, you know, as a 12-year-old or however old I was probably a little bit older then, maybe 13, 14, I just thought was incredibly cool. And this magazine, it had got some interviews, and then it got a section where it didn't have complete songs, but it had a whole bunch of riffs that you could learn. And so the first couple of riffs that I learned were, I think, For Whom the Bell Tolls, maybe what else was in there? Seek and Destroy, probably Enter Sandman. So not complete songs, just a few riffs. And that, you know, it took a bit of effort to get those riffs. But as soon as I got those riffs and I showed them to my friends, that sort of elevated my status a little bit amongst my friends, because I could play some Metallica riffs on the guitar. And then I got my first electric guitar, which was this little black Encore guitar, very very cheap sort of beginner guitar, but it had sort of like a black sparkly finish and shark fin inlay, so also that was kind of cool. And you know, for the next couple of years, I just obsessed over metal and grunge and learned as many riffs and solos and whatever else that I could. You know, I had guitar lessons as well at the same time, because my parents kind of insisted that I didn't just mess around playing this noisy music, but I actually learned to play the guitar properly, is what they said. So I had guitar lessons as well. And actually, you know, that was really valuable, especially later on, because I kind of like turned on to classical guitar a bit later on and so on. But really my passion was metal, and I was obsessed with it. I wanted to be in a band, I wanted to be in a metal band, and in fact, me and some friends, we did create our own band. We had a couple of bands which had very embarrassing names. So I think one of them, I had this little sort of choker necklace that had got a little Pegasus on it, and so the band was called Metal Pegasus, which was pretty awful name for a band. And another band was called Parasitica, because you know, a lot of the bands have got an A at the end, like Metallica, Pantera, Sepultura. So you had to just choose a word that had got some kind of diabolical association and then put an A on the end. So Parasite, Parasitica sounded a bit like Metallica. Yeah, anyway, pretty awful band. We wrote our own songs that were really, really, really terrible, and we all thought we were going to be famous one day and that we would be, you know, an amazing metal band. We'd be the next Metallica, of course, as you do when you're 14 years old. But yeah, so, you know, I had to thank my parents for sort of, you know, although they were reluctant at first, but they did, you know, help me out, because they bought me my first guitar, and then a little bit later they bought me my next guitar, which was a better guitar. You know, and my music teacher at school, I remember, because I played guitar, he let me use, we had this little Tascam 4-track tape recorder, and he let me use that. So that kind of got me into sort of multi-track recording. None of the other music students got to use that. A lot of the other music students were sort of just classical type instruments, you know, sort of flutes and violins and trumpets and whatnot. So whenever they had to do any sort of composition work, they just worked on their own. But I got to use this little drum machine and this little 4-track recorder, and so create these little sort of instrumental guitar pieces that were very much inspired by the instrumental pieces of Metallica, and probably ripped off some of the riffs as well. But yeah, so those early years, those kind of early formative years where I was discovering metal and discovering how to play the guitar, and you know, so much time and spent with the guitar and talking about guitar with friends and so on, that really kind of, you know, sort of made me who I am, I guess, as a musician. You know, and obviously, you know, you have these bands that are your favourite bands, but at some point you start looking backwards and you start seeing, well, who influenced these bands, and then that's when you kind of discover, you know, the sort of older bands, and Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, Diamond Head, and so on, and all these great rock bands of the past. You know, and you become aware of this kind of heritage of metal that exists. And it is really, you know, from this area, or, you know, close to where I'm from, near to Birmingham and the West Midlands and so on, where a lot of these bands are coming from. So, you know, I really felt that I wanted to be able to watch this concert over the weekend and sort of somehow be a part of it, or be a part of the experience of it. And yeah, so it was really great to be able to watch that on the TV, and you know, it was great. I wasn't familiar with all of the bands that were playing, but they were all brilliant, and they all covered Black Sabbath songs or Ozzy songs, and that was just great to see. And then the sort of final part with Ozzy and Black Sabbath taking to the stage was really quite moving, and you know, just to see Ozzy there in that chair, in that throne on stage, performing for the final time, and you know, see the reaction of people in the crowds, people tearing up in the crowds. It was a good show. It's a good show. So I don't know if any of you guys watched it out there. You know, maybe some of you might be ex-metal fans, or still are metal fans. Maybe some of you just, you know, you're not that interested in metal at all, which is cool, you know. But I just wanted to talk about that today and sort of, sort of get that off my chest a little bit to a certain extent, because it's kind of, yeah, you know, having watched that on Saturday night, it's been sort of lingering there in my mind over the weekend, and thinking about the show, and you know, going back and listening to some old records that I haven't listened to for ages, and so on. It's been a really fun weekend, sort of experiencing that. But then it kind of got me thinking as well. You know, I think, and this is the modular connection that I'm going to bring in now, because I think there's a lot of people that I've spoken to, or a lot of people that I know, friends that are into modular and so on, that definitely are, you know, people who probably got into music initially through rock music, through metal, through guitar. And it's kind of interesting to think about the connection between the two types of music, which at first you would think, you know, very, very different types of music. Metal and modular are not really alike in any way. Yeah, metal and modular not really alike in any way at all. At first glance you would think, you know, because modular synth is it's electronic. It's very sort of you know, it can seem very, very rigid in terms of, like, you know, if you've got a sequence going or something that's following a pulse. You know, it's very on the beat. It's not like a human being playing a drum kit where tempo is going to waver slightly. A lot of the music that comes out of modular, you know, you could sort of classify it as EDM, you know, sort of dance music type stuff, or ambient stuff, which you know, is very, very far from metal. But so why does it seem to be that it attracts people who have been into metal in the past? And, you know, is there a connection between modular and metal? Well, I think to a certain extent there is. And I think that part of that connection is to do with the type of people. So, you know, if I think back to my youth, to my younger days, the thing about metal that was special, it wasn't just the music, but it was a small community of people in our school that were into metal. We didn't really fit in with the cool kids. We didn't fit in with a lot of other people, and there was just a small minority of us. And metal was something that we could sort of you know, have some connection with and sort of club together and band together. And we had our own little, you know, group of people that were kind of separate from everyone else. We didn't really fit in with everyone else. And that was, you know, that was the important part. That was the thing that gave us connection. It was that sort of, you know, it was that that outsiderness, which again, that's something that I spoke about. I did a video ages ago talking about this book, The Outsider by Colin Wilson. You know, and there definitely was this feeling that we were outsiders, and it was our love of metal that sort of brought us together. And to a certain extent, I think there's a very similar aspect with modular. A lot of people that are into modular also have that similar kind of feeling of being an outsider, not really fitting into the mainstream, and so on. You know, and the music that we create doesn't really fit in with the mainstream music and so on. So there's a similar kind of worldview, I guess, or philosophy behind metal and modular. And then, you know, when you actually sort of get down to the actual music, obviously, you know, metal is very noisy. It can be dissonant. It can be chaotic. And these are all things that we can find in modular as well, to a certain degree, even more so than exists, you know, in metal. So, you know, some of the stuff that you can create with a modular synth is so dissonant and noisy, and, you know, devoid of melody and harmony and rhythm and so on. And I think that does appeal. If you are somebody that enjoys that, and you enjoy metal because it has that element to it, then you're gonna enjoy the sound of a lot of modular music that is that way. And then again, you know, that both types of music are very much built around physicality and you know, and performance. And although, you know, it's a very different thing, you know, if you watch a metal band performing on stage, it's obviously very physical, and, you know, they're sort of jumping around and beating their guitars and whatever. Whereas you're not going to get that same element with a synth, but it is, for the person performing, it's a very physical thing. You know, it's not like making music in another way with a computer or whatever, but you're physically interacting with the synth, and that is a very important part of how the music is made. And so, you know, I think there is this kind of crossover between metal and modular, and that might be, you know, that might be part of the reason why so many of us are, you know, past metal guitarists. You know, and these days I don't listen to an awful lot of metal, if any, really, but every now and again I will pull out a CD or whatever and put something on in the car, you know, an old album from my youth. But you know, watching that live stream over the weekend, it really kind of reminded me, it reminded me a lot of my youth, and it reminded me a lot of why I got into music in the first place. You know, and music, it was never meant to be a career. It was, you know, yes, I may have had aspirations of being a famous guitar player or whatever, but you know, it was a passion. It was something that I was to a certain extent obsessive over, and I guess that's just sort of, you know, it's grown. That has grown over time, and it's that sort of yeah, that passion and intensity has never really it's never really gone away. It's just moved from one form to another, and I think that's, you know, that's the important thing. The same kind of energy that flows through the music that I tried to create as a as a 14-year-old, which was probably terrible, is still there today, and it still flows through the music that I'm trying to create with, you know, with the modular synth, which hopefully is a little bit better, but still could be equally as terrible. You know, but it's that joy of sound, and it's the exploration. It's like the DIY ethic. You know, it's more than just, as I've said in other videos, it's more than just a hobby. It's more than an entertainment. It's an identity, I guess. So, yeah. So that's you know, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to talk about that show at the weekend, which I don't know if any of you watched it and enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments. Or maybe you know, you hate metal and you hate Black Sabbath and all of those things. In which case, let me know in the comments. But yeah, at the end of the day, though, it all comes from the same place, which is a love of music and community and creativity and so on. And it's good sometimes to sort of remember where we started on our musical journeys, and for me that was with metal, and specifically Metallica. As they say, the first cut is the deepest, or something like that. What's that song? Cheesy song from Rod Stewart. But yeah, for me it was Metallica, and in fact I even tried to sort of cover a Metallica song with my synth, which maybe I'll put a link, one of those link things up somewhere. Yeah, I tried to. It wasn't really a cover because I didn't do the whole song. It was really just taking a riff, one part of a sort of plucked guitar part, and turning that into a riff for a modular piece, the basis of a modular piece. So yeah, maybe just check that out if you are a Metallica fan, and you can see how I butchered that song. Yes, and so although modular is where I've ended up, but it really was metal that was the beginning of my journey, and then a very circuitous route to get where I am right now. But anyway, yes, I hope you've enjoyed the video today and found that interesting. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on that, and if you think there is a connection between metal and modular, or maybe other forms of music that you liked in the past that have sort of translated into the modular that you do. So if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button, and leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.